Do you have a passion for running marathons? Is it something that really gets your adrenaline pumping? Well, approximately 1.1 million runners complete a marathon each year, which is roughly 0.01% of the world's population, according to the International Institute for Race Medicine. Eric Spitz is a former collegiate, cross-country, and track athlete who loves running marathons and traveling, and for the last 7 years, he's combined both of those passions with a goal of running a marathon in all 50 states. He's a proud member of the 50 States Marathon Club, with 15 states currently knocked off of his list, and he has no plans on slowing down anytime soon. Spitz joined me this week to discuss his love of running marathons and how he hopes to contribute to the world by following his passion. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to dive into your passion for running and traveling today. Thanks so much for being here, and it's great to see you this afternoon.
Yeah, it's so great to see you, and thanks again for having me on here, Kevin. I'm really excited to get into this conversation for sure.
Yeah, as am I, buddy, and they tell me that you have a passion for running and traveling, and you've run a marathon and up to 15 states, and you're on a mission to hit all 50. So tell me about your passion for running, buddy. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I've actually been a runner for as long as I can remember. Some of my earliest memories, I remember my dad taking me on a 2-mile route near my house and doing that with him when I was in elementary school. But as weird as it sounds, I feel like I didn't truly grow to appreciate and love running as much until I was in high school. I actually went to football camp, funny as it is, for one day when I was in 9th grade. Even though it wasn't something I was naturally good at, I wanted to be a wide receiver, and I thought I'd give that a try. And I went to camp for one day, and then I just kind of thought, I really should stick with running. I think that's more my calling. So yeah, ultimately stuck with it. Continued to run cross country and track all throughout high school and college. It even got a scholarship to run it in college, and got to do some traveling a little bit in college, and get a little bit of that experience with traveling and running there. So I was really fortunate for that. But yeah, it's so I've been into running for essentially as long as I can remember.
Yeah, and tell me, what's the most rewarding experience you've gotten from running thus far, buddy? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I would have to say that would just be running the Boston Marathon, and doing that multiple times at that. So I'm about to be heading out next month to run my 5th Boston Marathon. And I don't know, it was something I never really envisioned for myself. It was always kind of one of those pipe dream bucket list races. And I wasn't sure if I'd, stick with running long enough after I got out of college or stick with the training and the routine. But no, I really surprised myself and, just continue to do this marathon running. And I'm very blessed and fortunate to be able to run Boston multiple times and soak in the culture, the energy, the aesthetics of that race, because it's truly a special experience. And yeah, that's definitely been one of the highlights of my running career for sure.
Yeah, and Eric, tell me, I'm curious to ask you about the mental makeup it takes to be successful at this. What do you think it takes to be a successful marathon runner from a mental standpoint, buddy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, mentality is a huge aspect of it. I think more than anything, you just need to be disciplined in order to be successful. I think that can be applied to a lot of different aspects outside of running as well. But in the context of running, that means going out there every day and going for a run, even if it's raining, snowing, if you're tired, or if you claim you're too busy. You just need to make time for those sessions, as mundane as they can feel sometimes. Because I truly think it really adds to your success to put in those training sessions and be able to do that consistently. And yeah, and I mean, it's a whole, I guess, it's a crazy experience to run a marathon. I mean, it's the mental strength it takes to do that, along with the physical strength, is something that's been one of the hardest things I've done so far in life. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I keep going back to it anyway. And I just love the thrill of the challenge of it, um, how physically and mentally taxing a race can be. There's a weird addiction to doing that, and then seeing the finish line at the end and crossing it. I mean, there's no better feeling than that.
And there's a sense of prosperity when you finish, isn't there?
Oh, so true. Yeah. It's so hard to describe the feeling, but it's truly addicting. I mean, I guess that's what keeps me coming back and makes me want to keep pushing the envelope further and further, and running more marathons, going to more states. It's just, I can't help but get sucked up into the feeling.
Yeah, and as you get older, Eric, I'm curious from a physical perspective, what is a part of your routine physically to make sure that you can continue to repeat the pattern of doing this over and over? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question too. And it's hard because there's always something that I would ideally love to do when I train, and then there's what I actually do when I train. So there always seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd be running probably 2-3 times the amount of miles that I put in on a weekly basis. But obviously it's it's a lot easier said than done, because when you balance, working and having a social life, and also doing what I do with podcasting, it gets difficult to balance all of those aspects and to squeeze running in there too. But yeah, from a physical perspective, I mean, ultimately I just try to get the runs in and just to log the miles. I used to be really good about being strategic about my workouts and actually doing tempo runs, which are basically runs at a quick, like almost like at a race pace, and you do that for 6-8 miles or so, depending on where you're at in your training schedule. But or cut down runs, which are essentially, you go out for, let's just say, 5 miles at a controlled pace, and then you run back 5 miles at a faster pace, progressively getting faster, almost getting into the whole negative split mentality, where you get faster as you keep progressing in a race. So I used to be a lot more strategic and implement those workouts into my routine, but unfortunately I just log the miles, and I just go out there and run, even if it's a slow pace, and I just log the work and put the miles in that way. But that's essentially what I've been doing as I've been getting older. And I would love to get back into the specialized workouts and routines, because I do think it makes a difference. But yeah, I think ultimately just going out there and running.
Yeah, and that leads into my next question, Eric. Do you consider yourself an adrenaline seeker in doing this sort of passion work, buddy? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would think so. I think I definitely chase those adrenaline sports and things like that, because and it's really funny too, because I keep catching myself pushing the envelope even more. So I'm running these marathons, but then I get thinking in my head, like, I would love to do an ultra marathon someday. And then I start thinking about that. And for everyone out there, that's, so I even have some friends who have done a 100-mile race. And I was just thinking, like, just think of the physical aspect and the mentality to tackle something like that, to run a 100-mile race. I can't even fathom that concept, but it's something that it really intrigues me, and something that I would love to eventually do. And I even have some friends who are into rock climbing, and the thought kind of occurred to me too. It's like, I can see myself being a rock climber. Like, I would love to do that. So I just keep chasing these random ambitious things. So I think that's ultimately at my core, is I'm just looking to do something that gives me some sort of adrenaline rush.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, adrenaline, if I don't stay busy, I don't stay out of trouble. So I'm constantly seeking other ways of adrenaline, so I can relate that way, buddy.
Exactly.
And Eric, tell me, I'm curious. I asked you earlier about your favorite running a memory or experience, but is there a state that you haven't been to that you want to see in greater detail, buddy, from a running perspective?
Yeah, so one that's been on my list for a while is the Mare City Marathon. I believe it's called the Mare City Marathon in Anchorage, Alaska. So I've been to, I want to say it's either 42 or 44 of the 50 states. I've almost knocked out all of them just from a purely traveling standpoint. But Alaska is one of the few I haven't been to at all. So it's this great kind of like unknown, uncharted territory to me of just so yeah, I haven't ran a marathon there, obviously, haven't been there at all. And so that one I'm just really itching to do for so many different reasons, just to experience a whole new place, knock out another state and just, I mean, the national parks there look amazing. I would love to explore those. But then this marathon in particular, it takes place on the summer equinox. So I believe it's on June 20th, but it's the longest day of the year. So, and it's, and in Alaska, I mean, it's bright for at that time of year. It's light outside for like 20 hours of the day or so. I mean, it's pretty much light out all day. And I would love to experience just that in general. I think that'd be a really cool experience to have. And originally, I was supposed to go out there and do it in 2020, but then I think everyone know what happened in 2020, and that didn't happen. So I keep pushing that race off, but I've been itching to do it.
Well, sometimes patience is a virtue, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
And Eric, I know that you you write about your experiences in your blog, buddy, and tell me about the experience of sharing your thoughts and feelings as you're going through this, and the blog you write as well. I'm curious, bud.
Yeah, of course. So, no, I think reflection is truly important and really powerful. So during the pandemic, I sat down and I wrote about every state I'd completed up through that point. And I'm so glad I did, because I don't want these stories to be forgotten. And, as time marches on, the small details will be forgotten. So it's fun to go back on my writing and relive those experiences. And I'm unfortunately a little bit behind in writing about them again, but I'm hoping to make some time to get caught up and put those stories out there. The ultimate goal, I think, is to compile everything and release a book once I complete all 50 states and kind of break down each state in my experience there. So I think what I have released is on 12 states, because I had written through Indianapolis and Indiana, but since then I'm actually at 16 states now as of a few weeks ago, because I just did the Cowtown Marathon in Texas. So I still have to write about Wisconsin, doing the Chicago Marathon, doing one in Jackson, Mississippi, and the Cowtown Marathon. And I was supposed to do one in Alabama in December, but they unfortunately canceled that one due to the weather. So it was still fun. I went down there and got to explore around Alabama, had a good time, but unfortunately did not knock another state off the list. So I got to go back and do that.
Well, I tell you, you'll be racking up the freaking flyer miles for sure, buddy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I know that you also have your own podcast, but buddy, when you talk about your journey, I think it's called the Juxtaposed Journeys. So tell me all about it and the message that you're trying to convey through the platform, buddy.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Juxtaposed Journeys is also a podcast that I started also during the pandemic. And I think it ultimately came about because I started really missing having these conversations with people while I traveled. Since I couldn't travel during the pandemic, I really miss meeting these people, having these conversations about all the things that they're passionate about. So whether it's just a side hustle that they do or a full-fledged operation, these are the conversations I just love having, people that are outside of the realm of their 8-to-5 job. And it's these conversations to where you get somebody on a tangent about, let's just say, movies or music or some sort of hobby that they're really into, and they just get a smile on their face, and then they talk your ear off about it. Those are the conversations I love having, and that's what I try to capture on the show, is just that essence in a sense. So yeah, it's an interview style podcast. I bring a guest on each episode and I ask them about how they got started in this venture, kind of what they've learned along the way, where they want to eventually be with it. And I think it's ultimately aimed at just kind of, beginners, and just kind of showing the origin story of how they got started on these ventures to hopefully inspire other people to follow a venture that they're interested in. Maybe that's like a new hobby or a new lifestyle adventure that they're just getting into, and they're like, yeah, I want to explore this more. And then they hear somebody talk about it, explain it, and it makes them kind of want to do it and pushes them to, I guess, pursue all of their creative endeavors and just go after what they want to in life. I think that's the ultimate message of what I'm trying to spread with it.
Yeah, and tell me, Erica, I'm curious to ask you about what's your definition of having a authentic conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to me, a conversation is meaningful and authentic when it's honest. I think it's okay for people to have differing opinions and lifestyles, but I think there's a way to convey those thoughts and viewpoints without being disrespectful. And I respect those types of conversations the most. Just healthy and honest conversations where each side expresses their opinion earnestly, listens to the other party, and maybe even walks away with a different viewpoint or interpretation themselves. So I think that's ultimately what it boils down to, is just being authentic and having that honest conversation with somebody and being respectful while doing it.
Yeah, I have to tell you, buddy, I actually started this podcast during the pandemic because, I was about to start a job, and because of the pandemic, my contract got suspended. So I had some extra time, and I always like to extend the conversation of inclusion. So this is how this podcast started too. So I told myself when it started, Eric, that there was only so much Netflix I could watch in a day, right?
No, it's so true. Yeah, no, and it's a great route and a great platform to go. So yeah, I mean, no, that's awesome, and that's really cool that we have very similar experiences in that regard.
Yeah. And Eric, tell me, so I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. So I have spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy, and one of the things that I try to do through this podcast and my other ventures is promote an atmosphere and an environment for inclusion. So when you think from a broad perspective about your definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what do you think of, buddy? I'm curious.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question, and yeah, I think, man, diversity, inclusion, and so I would say, yeah, I mean, in terms of diversity, I think just like, everyone has something special to offer, and bringing their authentic self to the table and just kind of being sort of what I'm looking for. I guess being true to yourself and just kind of putting yourself out there and really emphasizing, what makes you special and having that conversation with people. And then I think ultimately what I've learned so much from podcasting myself is that, even though we all have different walks of life and different paths and we're all on different parts of our journeys, we also have a lot in common too. There's so many commonalities. And then once you find those commonalities, it's such a beautiful thing, because then things start to click and you can start to connect with different things, and then you eventually find more connections. So on paper, no matter how different I feel like everyone is, you can find those commonalities, and then once that starts to go, then you start to have those connections, and then that's when some really special conversations start.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, I'm curious to ask you about not compromising on your happiness. So I want to know, is there anything in life that you're unwilling to compromise on to achieve your personal happiness?
Yeah, I think for me, it would have to be travel and just my love for traveling. I mean, it's truly something that makes me happy and something that's kind of become a part of my identity over the years. And the idea of staying in one place for years on end just terrifies me, honestly. So to see new places, talk to new people, and ultimately experience a way of life that's different than my own, I think having those moments and having those experiences is essential in order for growth and understanding. And travel is something that's become very important to me over the years and something I prioritize. So I don't see it being something I'm willing to compromise on at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps you interested in learning. I always say, Eric, when you close your mind off to learning is the day that you die. So
Oh, exactly.
I always try to be inclusive to other opinions, experiences, and places, because extends my knowledge base and the conversation, doesn't it?
It really does. I think honestly, like just continuous learning is essential for growth. Once you stop doing that, yeah, I mean, to your point, I feel like that's just when you just become kind of stagnant and you just stop growing. And that's yeah, it's an ever growing and ever evolving process, and it never really stops. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, as a marathon runner, Eric, do you have a motto that you live your life by, both when you run and for your everyday life? I'm curious.
Hey, that's a really good question. So there's actually a quote by Steve Prefontaine, who's who was a very prominent runner back in the day, and I actually have it on my goal board, and I look at it pretty regularly. It's right on this whiteboard in the middle of my hallway, but it says to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift, and it's something I think about quite a bit. I mean, I when I say I'm going to do something or I want to do something, I'm going to give it my all, and sometimes it's not always pretty. I mean, I definitely have races to where it's not a very good time. It's my time's pretty ugly, but but I finish it, and I give it my all out there, and I'm still proud of myself at the end of the day. And then I just keep learning and keep growing and move on to the next race.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, I'm curious to ask you, as a marathon runner, how do you sort of use the physical benefits of running to your advantage in terms of keeping up your physical health? Because I think it's very important to always, having a disability myself, one of the things that I live my life by is the staying always active, right? So tell me about the physical benefits you get from running and how proud you are to be in the top physical shape. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, those aspects are all extremely important, and it definitely comes in handy when I want to do other things outside of running. If I, just want to do some hiking or do a new other physical venture that's not running. I mean, those things all carry over and translate with one another in terms of just endurance and being in that kind of physical shape. And it does wonders for mental health too, honestly. Like, as weird as it sounds to say, I feel like running keeps me sane. I mean, if I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed, I'll usually just go out for a run, and everything is just so much more clear to me after I'm done. I'm able to solve a problem I've been, pounding my head against the wall for hours trying to figure out. It just comes to me, and I'm able to think with so much more clarity after that, because I think that there's some tremendous aspects you gain from a mental standpoint by being physical as well. So I do think the two are interrelated with one another. So it's just overall a great package for sure.
Absolutely, you always have to stay active. I'm reminded of something my grandmother tells me. She tells me if I don't use my muscles and if I don't stay active, I lose it. Right? So you gotta stay active and engaged for sure. But I'm also wondering, for you, your personal and professional legacy, buddy. How do you think you want that to be defined?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think ultimately I want to be remembered for living life on my own terms. I mean, I have a passion for marathon running and traveling, so I find a way to make it work. I still work an 8 to 5 job, but that just means that my vacation time and any extra money I have goes towards these passions of mine. And I don't want to be defined by my day job. I mean, I guess unless I make my podcast my full-time, full-fledged operation, but instead I want people to view me as someone who goes out and does what they want to do and figures out a way to make it happen. And hopefully by that, it'll inspire others to do the same too.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Eric, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, buddy, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, for sure. So you can connect with me on Facebook and LinkedIn. My name is just Eric Spitz. Twitter, Letterbox, and Untapped. It's all Eric with the hair. Instagram, Eric with the beard. And then Juxtaposed Journeys is available wherever you stream your podcast. So Apple, Spotify, Audible. And juxtaposedjourneys.com is the main website, which is kind of a catch-all for all of the stuff Juxtaposed Journeys related. I have videos on there. I have my blog posts. I have the podcast RSS feed in there, so you can access all of that. And then Juxtaposed Journeys on Facebook and Instagram is just at Juxtaposed Journeys, one word. And recently I made a Twitter for it, and that's JUX Journeys Pod. And then YouTube, also Juxtaposed Journeys as well. And unfortunately, I don't have my podcast conversations on Juxtaposed Journeys for YouTube right now. Mainly, those are just videos, nature videos of me just gushing over nature and looking like a big goon on camera. But those are still fun.
Well, life is too short not to have fun, right?
Right, exactly. And then I also co-host on a movie podcast called Films for the Void, and that's available wherever you stream podcasts. And you can find that on Twitter at films_void. So yeah, I definitely got a ton of plugs to keep people busy.
Well, if you stay busy, you stay out of trouble, right?
Exactly.
Hey, Eric, I told you before this started that Friday was my favorite day of the week, and I get to end it by talking to you. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation about your passion for traveling and running your passion in the space, and time at my behalf is most appreciated, buddy, and I want to thank you for being here this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks so much again for having me on, Kevin. This is a blast.